One family, one factory, two world wars. The Krupp dynasty didn't just supply weapons to Germany, they perfected the art of profiting from conflict while the world burned around them. And when the dust settled after 1945, when the trials ended and the verdicts were read, they walked away wealthier than before. This is the story of how the Krupp family turned steel into empire, war into profit, and defeat into victory. A story most history books conveniently skip over. If you're finding this helpful, hit subscribe. I cover the hidden economic forces that shaped history every week. The Krupp story starts in 1811 in Essen, a coal-smudged industrial town in the Ruhr Valley. Friedrich Krupp founded a small steel casting factory with 2 partners and 4 workers. The factory struggled. Friedrich died broke in 1826, leaving his 14-year-old son Alfred to salvage what remained. Alfred Krupp had no formal training, no connections, and no money. What he had was an obsession with quality and an understanding that the future belonged to whoever could mass-produce precision steel. While other steelmakers cut corners, Alfred spent years perfecting seamless steel railway wheels and cast steel cannon barrels. By 1847, he'd built his first cannon, not for war, for demonstration. He wanted governments to see what Krupp steel could do. The 1851 Great Exhibition in London changed everything. Alfred displayed a massive cast steel ingot weighing over 2 tons. The metallurgical world was stunned. Prussian military officials took notice. Here was steel strong enough for modern artillery, consistent enough for mass production, and German enough to keep weapons manufacturing inside Prussia's borders. By the 1860s, Krupp was the Prussian military's primary arms supplier. The Franco-Prussian War of 1870 became Krupp's proving ground. Prussian artillery, equipped with Krupp breech-loading steel cannons, decimated French forces. The French had bronze cannons, traditional muzzle loaders that required crews to stand exposed while loading. Krupp's breech-loading design meant Prussian gunners could reload from behind cover, firing 3 times faster than their French counterparts. The technological gap was devastating. At the Battle of Sedan, Krupp artillery shredded French infantry formations before they could even engage. The Siege of Paris wasn't just a military victory, it was a product demonstration watched by military attachés from every major power. After 1871, every European power wanted Krupp guns. Orders flooded in from Russia, Italy, Austria-Hungary, even the Ottoman Empire. Alfred had turned warfare into a sales opportunity. Alfred died in 1887, leaving behind the largest private company in Europe and a simple directive to his son Friedrich Alfred, also known as Fritz: expand, diversify, dominate. Fritz Krupp understood something his father only glimpsed. Wars don't just create demand, they create dependency. By 1900, Krupp employed over 40,000 workers and produced everything from battleship armour to submarines, from howitzers to torpedoes. The company didn't wait for conflicts. It helped create the arms race that made conflict inevitable. But Fritz also understood discretion. When he died under scandalous circumstances in 1902, the company passed to his daughter Bertha. At 16, she became the richest woman in Germany. 4 years later, she married Gustav von Bohlen und Halbach, a Prussian diplomat. Kaiser Wilhelm II personally granted Gustav the right to add Krupp to his name. Gustav von Bohlen und Halbach became Gustav Krupp von Bohlen und Halbach. The dynasty had a new patriarch. Gustav ran Krupp with ruthless efficiency. He expanded production capacity, modernized factories, and cultivated relationships with German military leadership. When Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated in Sarajevo in June 1914, Krupp was ready. Not just ready, prepared for years. World War I was Krupp's masterpiece. The company produced the heavy artillery that flattened Belgian forts, the Big Bertha howitzers that terrorized Paris, the submarine components that nearly starved Britain into submission. Krupp steel was everywhere, in the trenches, in the skies, beneath the waves. Over 4 years, the company manufactured 150 million shells, 50,000 artillery pieces, and hundreds of thousands of rifles and machine guns. The human cost was catastrophic: 10 million dead, 20 million wounded, empires collapsed, economies shattered. And Krupp made record profits. Gustav expanded the Essen works to employ over 120,000 people. factory became a city within a city with its own housing, hospitals and schools, all funded by selling instruments of death. When Germany surrendered in November 1918, the Treaty of Versailles tried to dismantle Krupp's war machine. Article 168 forbade Germany from manufacturing tanks, heavy artillery, or military aircraft. The Allied Control Commission monitored German factories to ensure compliance. Krupp faced billions in reparations and potential prosecution for war crimes. But the Allies made a critical mistake. They assumed Krupp would comply. Instead, Gustav Krupp did what the family always did. He adapted. Publicly, Krupp pivoted to civilian production, making locomotives, farming equipment and cash registers. The Essen factory still employed tens of thousands, still generated massive revenue, still maintained its technical expertise. And behind closed doors, Krupp engineers worked on something else. In 1922, Krupp established a secret subsidiary in the Netherlands called Ingenieurskantoor voor Scheepsbouw, or EVS. The Dutch company designed submarines for the German Navy, skirting Versailles restrictions by operating outside German borders. Similar arrangements followed in Sweden, Spain and the Soviet Union. Krupp traded weapons designs for raw materials, built prototypes in foreign facilities, and trained German engineers in banned military technologies. The scheme was brilliant in its simplicity. German engineers travelled to these countries as civilian consultants. They tested new tank designs on Soviet proving grounds. They refined submarine technology in Spanish shipyards. They perfected artillery mechanisms in Swedish factories. Every innovation was meticulously documented and sent back to Essen, where the designs sat in fireproof vaults, waiting for the day Germany could openly rearm. The Weimar Republic knew. They had to know. But German military leadership wanted rearmament as much as Krupp wanted profits. By 1926, Krupp was secretly developing tanks in partnership with Soviet Russia. By 1930, Krupp engineers had designed over a dozen submarine models for foreign navies, with every blueprint archived in Essen for future use. The company even maintained dummy corporations to hide financial transactions. On paper, Krupp was making tractors and locomotives. In reality, those tractor factories could be converted to tank production in weeks. When Adolf Hitler became Chancellor in January 1933, Gustav Krupp initially hesitated. The Nazis were radical, unpredictable, bad for business stability, but Hitler promised rearmament, full rearmament, open rearmament. That changed everything. Gustav met with Hitler in February 1933. Within months, Krupp was funding the Nazi Party. Gustav chaired the Adolf Hitler Fund of German industry, collecting millions from industrialists to support the regime. In return, Hitler tore up Versailles restrictions and funneled government contracts to Krupp. The company could finally stop hiding. Between 1933 and 1939, Krupp transformed. The Essen factory expanded again, employing over 100,000 workers by 1938. Production shifted entirely to military hardware. Tanks, artillery, submarines, armour plating, ammunition, everything the Wehrmacht needed for conquest, Krupp manufactured. Gustav's son Alfred, now being groomed to lead, pushed for even greater expansion. The family didn't just support rearmament, they became its beating heart. When Germany invaded Poland in September 1939, Krupp steel led the advance. Panzer tanks with Krupp armour smashed through Polish defences. Artillery pieces designed in Essen shelled Warsaw. The Blitzkrieg wasn't just a military strategy, it was a product launch. Over the next 6 years, Krupp became the Third Reich's most important arms manufacturer. The company produced 100,000 artillery pieces, thousands of tanks, hundreds of U-boats. Krupp fuses detonated the bombs that levelled Rotterdam, London and Stalingrad. Krupp steel formed the hulls of the battleships Bismarck and Tirpitz. When the Wehrmacht needed something destroyed, they reached for Krupp. But production required labour, lots of labour, more than Germany's workforce could provide. So Krupp turned to slaves. By 1943, over 100,000 forced labourers worked in Krupp facilities. Prisoners of war, concentration camp inmates, civilians kidnapped from occupied territories, They worked 16-hour shifts in brutal conditions, starved, beaten and worked to death. The camps had names: Humboldtstrasse, Nürgeradstrasse, Deckenschule. Jewish prisoners were kept separate, given the worst jobs, fed the least. Children as young as 12 operated dangerous machinery. When labourers became too weak to work, Krupp simply requested replacements from the SS. The factory camps around Essen became death camps in all but name. Krupp managers kept detailed records of productivity rates, calculating how many weeks they could extract labour from each prisoner before they became useless. It was industrial murder, optimised for efficiency. Alfred Krupp, who took control of the company in 1943 after his father suffered a stroke, personally oversaw this system. He toured the facilities, approved labour requests and signed off on working conditions that amounted to systematic murder. This wasn't wartime necessity. This was profit maximisation through human exploitation. The Allies knew about Krupp's role. Strategic bombing campaigns targeted the Essen works repeatedly. Between 1943 and 1945, Allied bombers dropped thousands of tons of explosives on Krupp factories. The raids killed over 600 workers and damaged production facilities, but never stopped output entirely. Krupp engineers rebuilt faster than bombers could destroy. Even as Germany crumbled, Krupp kept producing. When American forces captured Essen in April 1945, they found a smoking wasteland. The Krupp works were shattered, but the company archives were intact. Allied investigators discovered everything: the secret rearmament in the 1920s, the Nazi funding, the slave labour camps, the deliberate exploitation of prisoners, all documented in meticulous German records. Alfred Krupp was arrested and charged with crimes against humanity at the Nuremberg trials, not the main trials. Those were for top Nazis. Alfred got his own separate trial as part of the subsequent Nuremberg proceedings in 1947. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence. Alfred didn't deny the facts. He denied responsibility. He claimed he was following orders, managing a business, doing what any industrialist would do in wartime. The judges didn't buy it. In 1948, Alfred Krupp was convicted of plunder and exploitation of slave labour. He received 12 years in prison and forfeiture of all property. The Krupp Empire, built over 137 years, was supposed to be dismantled forever. Justice finally had arrived. Except it hadn't. By 1951, the Cold War had changed everything. West Germany was now America's ally against Soviet expansion. Rebuilding German industry became a strategic priority. Former Nazis with technical expertise were suddenly useful again, and Alfred Krupp, sitting in Landsberg prison, became a problem. Keeping him locked up looked like vindictiveness. Germany needed industrialists, and Krupp was still Germany's most famous industrial name. In January 1951, American High Commissioner John McCloy granted Alfred Krupp clemency, not a pardon. Clemency. The conviction stood, but the sentence was commuted. Alfred walked free after serving just 3 years. Even better, McCloy restored Krupp's property. All of it. The factories, the assets, the company. Everything the Nuremberg tribunal had ordered forfeited was handed back. Alfred Krupp left prison and went straight back to work. He rebuilt the company, this time focusing on steel production, shipbuilding and heavy machinery. By 1953, Krupp was profitable again. By 1960, it was one of West Germany's largest corporations, employing over 100,000 workers once more. Alfred became a symbol of German economic recovery, celebrated in business schools and featured in magazines as an industrial visionary. American business publications praised his turnaround strategy. German politicians cited Krupp as proof that the nation could move past its dark history. The irony was staggering. The man convicted of enslaving workers now employed them voluntarily, and the world called it redemption. The slave labourers who survived Krupp's camps received nothing. For decades. It wasn't until 1959 that Krupp established a small compensation fund under public pressure, offering token payments to former forced labourers. The amounts were insultingly small. Many survivors refused on principle. Krupp never apologised, never admitted moral responsibility. The company treated compensation as a public relations expense. Alfred died in 1967, one of the richest men in Germany. His obituaries praised his business acumen and resilience. The slave labour camps were mentioned briefly, if at all. In 1968, Krupp became a corporation, ending 157 years of family control. But the Krupp Foundation, established by Alfred, retained ownership and control of assets. The family wealth remained intact. Today, ThyssenKrupp, the successor company formed through mergers, is a global industrial conglomerate worth billions. It manufactures elevators, submarines, and steel products. The Essen headquarters still stand. There's a small museum now acknowledging the dark history. Guided tours mention the slave labour. Corporate statements express regret. But here's what they don't tell you in those corporate museums. The Krupp family was never punished in any meaningful way. They never faced the systematic asset seizure applied to other major Nazi collaborators. They never experienced the generational poverty their forced labourers endured. 3 years in prison and a public relations headache. That was the price for arming 2 world wars and enslaving 100,000 people. The real story of Krupp isn't about steel or engineering innovation. It's about how power protects power, how economic utility can erase moral crimes, how the architects of mass death can be rehabilitated as visionaries if they're useful enough to the right people at the right time. 1 family, 1 factory, 2 world wars, millions of dead, and in the end, the Krupps won.